I have a funny clip to play for you of former Trump press secretary Kayleigh McEnany responding to a story that made her very unhappy, ruined her day. And the story is that an organization did a ranking of the greatness of presidents 1 through 46, the greatest president to the worst president. And you'll never guess who ended up at the very bottom of that list: Donald J. Trump. And that, of course, is going to make Fox News hosts less than happy. And that's indeed what we saw play out. So I'll break down more on this ranking after this.
A new ranking, and I'm going to add, in my view, a highly questionable ranking of presidents, is turning heads after Biden came in higher than both Donald Trump and Ronald Reagan in his wildest dreams. The survey was done by the Presidential Greatness Project, who claim to be the foremost organization of social science experts in presidential politics. They may be the foremost example of the disconnect between ivory tower academia and real people. That aside, Abe Lincoln ranked first. Okay, fair. Then comes Obama at 7th, and Biden came in 14th, actually beating Ronald Reagan, who came in 16th, and Trump dead last. Look, Lisa, where to begin? This is infuriating in so many ways. 154 respondents. They are the ivory tower elites who in no way represent the view of the American people.
No, but it also goes to show you, though, how history can be written, and some of it can be built off a lie as well. But no, this list is bogus. Everyone knows that, Obama's not that high. He was a terrible president. But I think on this president, sorry, I think on this is just my thought bubbles. You don't want to know what goes on in here. It's a lot.
Okay, so before responding to this myself, here is this from The Guardian. Donald Trump finished 45th and rock bottom of a list ranking U.S. presidents by greatness, trailing even historically calamitous chief executives who failed to stop the Civil War or botch its aftermath. Worse, for the likely Republican nominee this year, his probable opponent Joe Biden debuted at number 14, and it notes that this ranking considered responses from 154 scholars most connected to the American Political Science Association. So, according to the Fox News host, these are just woke elites being stupid, and Trump should be at the top of the list, even though they have spent their life learning about and becoming rather informed on the very relevant subjects that would help you make such a determination. But that scholarship is nothing because they're woke elites. Okay, so my takeaway on this is I do think it's important to note that the ranking system, the methodology, had to take into consideration the time in which presidents were president, the context in which they were president, what decisions was it even realistic to expect them to make, or I should say, what decisions were at their disposal, what were they dealing with at the time, and then within that context, how good of a president were they? And that is a really difficult ranking to do. I understand that for sure. And that's why even more interesting to me is Joe Biden in this. And it's a reminder of what I talk about a lot in the show, especially recently, that if you can pierce through the noise a little bit, and if you can see past the one subject that it seems all of the media is dedicated to spending all their time talking about, there's actually a lot of interesting insights to derive from Joe Biden's presidency. And a fact-based observer, I think, comes to the conclusion, based on the facts of Joe Biden's presidency, that he's been one of, if not the most successful president in modern American history, most effective in decades. And that is really notable. And so when I say the one subject, I'm sure you know what I'm referencing. It does seem that there is what I think you could fairly call an obsession with Joe Biden's age. And before I get into what I mean when I say he's been such a successful president, let me just quickly give my disclaimer, okay? Anything you're about to hear is not an attempt to invalidate you or your feelings or your concerns. Unless you're MAGA, then I'm trying to invalidate the heck out of you. No. But genuinely, if you have concerns about Biden for any reason, or this election, or his age in particular, I'm not trying to invalidate those concerns or say they're irrational or say don't believe your eyes or say you're going to be the reason that democracy dies if you talk about this too much. No. But I think, especially for media pundits who have a responsibility, for anyone with any size platform, you have a responsibility to do the best that you can to emphasize things that justify emphasis and to try to be proportional in the emphasis that you give to certain subjects. And usually the way that I think it's effective to make that determination is say, generally, which things impact people's lives the most and which things don't. And that's why I get so mad. It's not because I think you should shut up about it. That's not actually something you should care about. It's that I think a rational observer of current media coverage would go, there is a lot of discussion of this one topic of Joe Biden. But with any awareness of the other things that are relevant to Joe Biden's presidency, I think you would find that to be irrational, how much we're talking about just how many years it's been since he was born. And again, we'll get to all the things that I mean. But I just want to clarify why I get so angry when we talk about this. It just seems like a disservice to an audience of people who should be getting informed on things that matter in their lives. And so that does require a little discussion about any potential concerns as it pertains to the president's age. But that also requires discussion about the historic policy record. Those things impact the material well-being of people's lives in a way that the age never could. And yes, of course, there should be a lot of discussion about the other guy threatening the very foundation of our democracy. But let's set aside the threat to democracy, because I talk about that so constantly, for this segment, and talk about the discussion that's not being had enough in the media about Joe Biden's presidency, and that is his policy record. So when people say he's been so successful, what do they mean? What is this conversation that is being ignored in service of the age conversation? When Biden got into office, we were in a crisis. Don't forget that. People try to gaslight you and be like, what are you talking about? The Trump economy was doing well, and then Biden came in, there was inflation, there was all these things, ignoring the pandemic. So there was a crisis, an economic crisis, social crisis, and public health crisis. That's what Biden took over. Then just a few short years later, we are economically dominating on the world stage. Still lots of problems, but we have outpaced comparable economies in a recovery, meaning if Biden's leadership is doing anything in overseeing this economic recovery, likely it's making it better because of our comparison to other comparable economies. And wages are now increasing, adjusted for inflation at a rate that is stronger than they were before the pandemic. So just really hear that for a second. Wages are growing faster right now than they were when Trump was president before the pandemic. And this recovery meant 14 plus million jobs being created on Joe Biden's watch. Job growth, again, being stronger after we recovered all the pre-pandemic jobs than job growth was whenever Trump was president. So even after we recovered, job growth stayed stronger than it was when Trump was president. There are other topics, non-economic, like crime. Crime started to spike in 2020 when Trump was president, continued spiking because of pandemic conditions, and then now is back to pre-pandemic levels and is at 50-year lows in some places like Detroit. And we won't even get into all the other random things that had to be addressed post-pandemic, like inflation. Now that's all the way back down. The inflation, of course, being caused by recovery efforts under Trump and under Joe Biden. Again, people like to pretend like somehow only recovery spending happened under Joe Biden, which is rather absurd. And there were economic aftermaths of that recovery that was necessary because of the pandemic. But supply chains had to be addressed, all the issues that were being faced on that front. And of course, wars beginning that contributed to especially energy inflation. And then you get over into the policy record. You could say, well, all that was just by happenstance. Oh, that was going to happen anyway. We're going to have that incredible economic recovery that outpaced other countries no matter what. But then you look at policies that directly impact our economic situation, you start thinking, maybe this had something to do with it. For example, the American Rescue Plan. Right when Biden got in, being able to mobilize a strong response to help uplift people and pull the country out of the crisis to get us back to normal. The infrastructure law later on, a bipartisan piece of legislation in such a divided time, the largest investment in infrastructure since the Eisenhower highway program, roads, bridges, broadband, clean and reliable drinking water, the Inflation Reduction Act, largest investment in history in green energy, the lowering of prescription drug costs by allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices and capping the cost of insulin at $35 out of pocket per month. I was sitting with someone, by the way, the reason I'm saying like that is because I know some people feel like, oh my gosh, we're going through this again. How many times? I was sitting with a friend the other day and I started ranting about this subject. So you can imagine how fun dinners are with me. And as I was going through the list, they started saying it in sync with me because they've heard me say it so many times on my show. So that's how often I go through these things. The Chips and Science Act, of course, investing in American manufacturing, but these jobs, they just came out of nowhere. No, policies matter. The PACT Act, expanding veterans' health care, the gun safety bill, the first major action on gun violence at the federal level to this degree legislatively that we've seen in years, I think decade plus, enshrining marriage equality into federal law, the most student debt relief of any president in American history. And Biden has been the most pro-union president in a very long time, potentially like a century. And that is super important, especially to progressives. And he promised to be very pro-labor. He has been very pro-labor. And that means, yes, showing up on the picket line, a very symbolic show of support, getting attention to the UAW strike and showing that the US president was with their demands, and also actions that his National Labor Relations Board have been taking that have been incredible, among other things. So while Biden was overseeing an economic recovery and getting the country back to normal after this pandemic crisis and all the problems that came of it, there were also all of these historic policies being implemented that actually impact the lives of Americans. So then you think about all that. Trump threatens democracy, historic policy record, managing world crises. Is it really applicable to this moment to put all the emphasis on how many years it's been since he was a crying baby? Just trying to think of a new way to say it. Since he came out of the womb, I don't know. No, would be my answer. It's not that you can't observe and talk about it, whatever, but especially to those who have responsibility to emphasize things that matter to people, namely those in the media, I think we're messing up. And I'm putting myself in this even though I'm not messing up on it. I'm doing my best to right all of your wrongs. There we go. That's what I was trying to say. People in the media. No, I'm kidding. I understand people talk about it. So then you talk about the fact that people are talking about it. Then you talk about how so many people are talking about it. And then it goes on and on and on. But other things matter too, people. And so my request is talk about those too. Make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel. You can become a member at lukebeasleyshow.com/membership.